Good morning, folks. I can never get away from using the analogy that sitting here, being about speaker number 4 or 5, is like waiting in a dentist's chair. I did happen to be in a dentist chair once on an island in Greece when I was a student, but that dentist chair is not the same as that one I was in Greece, I can assure you of that. So John O'Reilly is my name. I'm CEO of a company called Greenbelt. We're responsible for delivering about 1/3 of the National Afforestation Programme each year. That means planting about 2,000 hectares. Little bit less, about 25% of that last year was broadleaf. The other section was coniferous planting. But I can safely say at the start of this speech that the area of growth potential we see within our company is definitively in establishing more native woodlands. It is the one focal area that we have concentrated on for the last 6 to 8 months, and we see it continuing to expand over the next number of years, and hopefully the presentation will explain why. So I suppose we always need to go back to the start. Where are we right now? In essence, what my task is, or what our forester's task is to deliver policy. We see ourselves as kind of a conduit between policy and the landowner. And you always have to bear in mind that whom you're asking to establish your native woodlands are predominantly landowners, but landowners really and truly are predominantly farmers. So you're looking at delivering what is a good policy, which has very attractive grants and premiums and financial incentives associated with it, but you're looking at getting that delivered on the ground. And if we take a look at the high-level figures, okay, the policies in place from 2014 to 2020, that's our current rural development programme. The total amount of funding that's available for native woodland establishment is stronger than 16 million. The Minister mentioned 20, but that includes native woodland conservation as well. The establishment grants pre the mid-term review, which just took place, were in the region of €5,000 approximately per hectare, and that excluded a fencing allowance. So I think, as you can see, the level of grant aid and the level of incentivisation that's available is quite attractive, and that lifted by 5% in the recent mid-term review. So one would have to say that the level of compensation there, or the level of grant aid that's available to establish plantations, is very attractive. If we look at the premiums, in other words, the financial incentive that is available to the landowner for establishing a plantation, the premiums are in the region of 665 to 680 euros per hectare, payable for a term of 15 years. And that is the incentive package that is currently available to landowners to establish native woodlands. But if we look back over the last 3 years of the programme, and we look at the targeted hectarage, the top line figure, the targeted hectarage is 450 hectares per year. And we look at the actual area planted, okay, pretty even Steven in the first year, but with a lift in 2017. But it is still behind target. And I think maybe picking up on some of the points made by the earlier speakers as well, I think it's interesting to see the average size of the plantation that's being established. In my opinion, it's quite small. So that's where we're starting from. So if we haven't hit our targets, I suppose we have to look back and taking into account all the work that the Forest Service have recently just done, we have to ask ourselves, why are we not hitting our targets? Why are we failing to achieve to plant a sufficient quantum of native woodlands? And really all I can do is voice my experience here from talking to landowners on the ground. So this is John O'Reilly's opinion, based on the feedback I get from foresters within Greenbelt and based on the feedback I get from the kitchen table. I just stimulate everybody to think about what is your perception of value, and what are other people's perception of value. So that'd be one area I want to discuss. The second area I'd like to discuss is your perception of risk and a landowner's perception of risk. And the third question is, for establishing native woodlands, what truly is an adequate quantum of remuneration? And I also like to use that word cash flow, because cash flow really, from the point of view of establishing native woodlands, is very important as well. Right, so I'll start with this one because maybe this is the way people look at a native woodland and see value. Maybe this is where a lot of people maybe in the room see value. I don't mean that in a bad way, I mean that in a logical way. So that native woodlands are an important part of Ireland's national heritage, history and culture, and are unique in terms of their biodiversity? Is it that they are homes to specialised woodland animals, birds, insects and plants, including red squirrels, pine martens, spotted woodpeckers, wood millets, to name but a few? Is it that native woodlands provide numerous ecosystem services such as protection and enhancement of water quality, recreational opportunities and carbon capture? Is that the perception of value? I believe that's the way the perception of value should be, but is that the perception of value that everybody has, particularly the landowner? Or does a landowner, who is predominantly a farmer, is his perception of value that I could establish a conifer plantation that's quite well grant aided and quite well premium aided by the Forest Service as well. I can have it in and out in 28 to 30 years. I have a premium that lasts for the first 15 years of that life cycle. I can tin it 3 times. I can clear fill it, tap into a tax efficient revenue stream. I can replant it. If I want to look at it in economic terms, it'll yield me about a 6% return on my investment, and it'll give me a reasonable cash flow. So I just stimulate the question, is that the perception of value? So which perception of value is right? There's one other perception of value that you need to take into consideration here as well, and that is, who are you asking to establish your native woodlands? So you're asking a farmer to establish your native woodlands, and what is his perception of value again? What is the key asset he is going to give you to establish his native woodland? And the key asset he's going to give you is the thing that he, I suppose, loves the most, really, and that's his land. And farmers put a lot of value on their land. It's the primary asset. It's everything they have, really. And just to look at the last 2 points, if he plants conifers, farmers appreciate that a planting land devalues it from their current agricultural value. They realise that. But they also know, and they're quite knowledgeable, that if you plant conifers on your land, you're going to devalue your land to approximately €4,000 per acre. And you have a very healthy secondary market for coniferous plantations in Ireland. Well, if he plants broadleaves, predominantly native woodlands, he's going to devalue his land back to about €800 per acre. And basically, right now, I won't say it'll be that way forever, but right now there's a very poor secondary market for native woodland plantations. So you've got to take into consideration that you're asking somebody to plant native woodlands, and he's potentially going to devalue the most valuable asset he sees in his head. So just keep those things in mind as we move through the presentation. The other thing we need to think about is, what's a landowner's perception of risk? Is the perception of risk different between establishing conifer plantations, and is the perception of risk different between establishing broadleaf plantations? Because when we talk to landowners about establishing native woodlands and broadleaf plantations in general, they see some risk. They see a bit of risk in relation to the rotation length. When we talk about establishing plantations of oak, they do see some element of risk there. I often create an analogy for people realistically when I talk about planting oak. There's an oak woodland beside where I grew up, and that's where I played, and it's in Bunclody, a beautiful native woodland stretching up the Blackstairs Mountains up along the Clody River, and it was established in 1847, an estate planting, and it's mature, could have been clear felled, or felled actually. Some timber, they were trying to extract some timber when the Ryder Cup was in Ireland to build a bridge, but it's an SAC, so it's protected, so it's still standing there nicely. But that's the scale of growth of an oak woodland. Is another risk animal damage? We've heard quite a bit about deer, so we know they're there. You know, is disease a risk? We have disease in our ash plantations at the moment. You know, not a detrimental really to currently to trying to drive the native woodland programme. Is there a skill set and a knowledge risk? And is there a resale risk? So all these things will be coming into a landowner's mind as he thinks about establishing native woodlands. So are they getting adequate remuneration? You know, if we conclude that those planting lands place more value on short rotation conifers and on the future resale of the value of the plantation, and they are also perceived that establishing native woodland contains an element of risk, then we need to recognise the requirements of these landowners and design a scheme that suits their needs, and not build a scheme the way we see it, the way we want it to work. I often believe strongly that when you're marketing something to somebody, you have to think about what they want and sell them what they want, rather than try and sell them what you want. So we need, this is my opinion again, we need a balance, or to rebalance the overall perception of value in favour of ecosystem services. We need to create a cash value for ecosystem services provided by native woodlands. And I've believed this for a long period of time. However, doing something about it has proved quite challenging. So we've got to create another layer of value on top of the standard valuation you see in a native woodland. And to me, that can be driven by ecosystem services. Landowners need to receive a top-up ecosystem services payment either annually or upfront. We need to find what I call the financial tipping point. In other words, what is the additional quantum that a landowner needs to actually decide that planting a native woodland is a viable option for him or her. Sorry. Yeah. Okay, so acting recently on a little bit of legislation from the EU, the EU Commission have recently published guidelines on non-financial reporting. These guidelines are intended to help companies draw up relevant, useful, concise, non-financial statements according to the requirements of the directive, which will be applied from 2018. Non-financial reporting will include environmental, climate, carbon, social and governance-related information, funding native woodland schemes by targeting payments to forest owners for ecosystem services provided by these plantations, provides an opportunities for companies to include expenditure on the creation of native woodlands in their financial reporting. So we decided maybe that this was a realm that we could work with, decided within Greenbelt that is, and we felt that maybe there was some potential in here to come up with a way of adding an additional financial layer on top of what the Forest Service provide to encourage people to establish native woodlands. And I don't know, when you think about something, I'm a big believer that when you think about the devil, he will appear. And when we started to work on this, within a matter of weeks, we started to establish a rapport with two companies based in the UK with both Forest Carbon and Natural Capital, who basically started the conversation by saying that they had a blue chip company who were looking at maybe getting involved in driving some of the areas in Irish forest policy that were currently under pressure. So lo and behold, the company ended up to be Microsoft. So we negotiated couple of meetings. We started to come up with a strategy that we felt would help deliver additional quantums of native woodland planting on the ground. We tried to define that word additional. What was the quantum that would be sufficient? What is the level of additionality that would push landowners to plant more land? And the number we came up with was €1,000 per hectare. Sounds quite rounded, but that was the number that we felt would achieve that tipping point and encourage landowners to actively consider the establishment of more native woodlands. So whilst landowners retain full ownership of the lands and the trees, the resulting timber, Microsoft focus, their focus is not on anything other than the environmental benefits that the woodlands provides. And they really want to help Ireland to establish their own native woodlands and hit the 450 hectare target that we documented earlier on in the presentation. So this to me was a first step towards creating a value for an ecosystem service. In essence, what it is, it's an upfront payment that's paid in line with the planting grant. €750 is paid once the first instalment of the grant is paid, and €250 per hectare is paid after 4 years of maintenance. And it acts as an additional incentive to encourage landowners to consider native woodland planting. So that's what we put in place after much discussion and much thought and much thinking. But what actually happened? Did it work? Did it increase the level of afforestation? Did it encourage landowners to look at establishing more native woodland plantations? And the result was good, I have to say. We were very pleased with the result. Within one planting season, over autumn and spring planting season, we established 136 hectares of native woodlands that I can safely say 90% of that was driven by the additional payment by Microsoft. The interesting thing is that the average size went up quite dramatically. So the average size went up to 12 hectares. That's a 300% increase on the previous average. So size is going up. In one planting season alone, native woodland establishment in Greenbelt rose by 80% to 170 hectares. Now, all the broadleaf species we plant don't all fit in under the native woodland category. Kevin explained earlier on that there are numerous categories you can plant under, two of which are native woodland categories. But establishing other native woodland plantations like alder plantations, etc., fall outside those totals. So we established 170 hectares of native woodlands, by far and away the biggest growth area in the type of planting that goes on in Greenbelt at this point in time. The other thing that has happened is that our foresters are much more switched on to marketing native woodlands at the kitchen table. I can honestly say that some of them genuinely felt that maybe they were selling landowners a bit of a dud when they were getting people to try and establish native woodlands, and that they felt that they may have been encouraging them into a line that was bringing them down a poor cash flow line, devaluing their land into the future, etc. However, going forward now, they're much more enthused selling it when they have that extra payment up front. Now, the first tranche of Microsoft funding was 136,000, so the first 136 hectares soaked up that 136,000 very quickly. But I can't say what Microsoft are going to do. In fairness, they're very sensitive about what they say and very sensitive about what they do. But I can assure you that we're very much negotiating a second tranche of funding with them that is in excess of that quantum. So all I can say is that within Greenbelt, the growth area, from an afforestation perspective right now, is undoubtedly the establishment of native woodlands. We've driven it probably from about 80 hectares up to 136, and we would have 150 hectares easily of pent-up demand. Our foresters are currently marketing native woodland establishment to all landowners, and the future, with a couple of question marks, I truly believe is bright. Thank you very much.